Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 4 of our first Social Studies unit. If you will recall last time we discussed the Mi'kmaq, the indigenous peoples of the Maritimes, the Maritime provinces, pardon me. This time we are going to talk about another indigenous group. But before we do so, I want to do a short review. What do we recall about the Eastern Woodland farmers? Well, they're from Southern Ontario. They are farmers of beans, squash, and corn, and they often live in these long houses, if you recall. They were these large wooden buildings which housed large extended families. So we are going to talk about the Haudenosaunee. Now, they are the indigenous people of southern Ontario, southwestern Quebec, and part of the northeastern United States. I'm from about here-ish. That's where I was raised. So this is the group's traditional territory on which I grew up. Um, they are a one of the Eastern Woodland Farmers groups that we talked about. So they traditionally, as we've said before, they lived in these long houses and permanent settlements, which was unusual for indigenous peoples 600 years ago. A lot of them uh, did not have permanent settlements. They were like the Mi'kmaq. They would live in one place in the winter and another place in the summer. The Haudenosaunee lived in permanent settlements. You see here, you have these long houses and surrounded by a wooden spiked fence. This is called a palisade. All right. And they were known for farming what were called the Three Sisters: beans, squash, and corn. The Haudenosaunee were a confederacy of at first 5 and eventually 6 nations. These were the Seneca, Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Onondaga, and eventually the Tuscarora. These groups were all culturally very different and they spoke different languages. So, how did they all stick together? Well, they managed to stick together due to something called the Great Law of Peace. The Great Law of Peace was the Haudenosaunee law, which allowed for the 6 nations to coexist, and it governed the interactions between them to ensure that the relationship remained peaceful. Decisions in the Confederacy were made by a group of 50 chiefs called the Grand Council. These chiefs were all men, but they were appointed by the clan mothers. So these were like the head women of um, each group, each band, so to speak. These women had the power to remove the chiefs that were acting improperly. So if they decided that the chief was not acting appropriately or not acting in the way governed by the great law, they could just kick him out and replace him with someone else. So, the Haudenosaunee used these wampum belts to record treaties and other agreements. So this is what's called the Hiawatha Belt, and signifies the alliance between the original 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nations. All right, this is the belt that first formed the Haudenosaunee as an alliance of 5 different nations. So, what you're going to do first, you are going to read this story, Santi and Gantowisa. So you'll read through this story similar how you read, what was it, Misela Member 2, the Mi'kmaq story last time. So you'll read through this, and then much like last time, you will go through this chart and fill in where do they live, how do they meet their needs, How's society organized? How are leaders selected? Pardon me. How does government make decisions? And what was the role of women? All right. Between what I've talked about and what was in those slides and the story, you should be able to fill all of this in. Okay? That is your task for today. Tomorrow we will discuss yet one more group for native to the eastern part of the country. Um, but until then, take care of yourselves and stay safe.